Welcome back to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. I'm your host, Anthony Harcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today I'll be doing that just for you. And we're going to be talking about sunlight and the misinformation that is out there in relation to sun harm, sun damage, melanoma, and it's all bad sun, right? Everything about the sun is bad. And the reason why I'm raising this topic is recently we had the Australian of the Year. It was a joint winner between Professor Georgina Long and Professor Richard Scholar. And they did some great work, no doubt about it, in terms of immunotherapy in relation to melanoma treatment. So it's obviously the treatment of melanoma and using their way of doing it through their immunotherapy methodology. And it's fantastic. It's really helpful for those that have got this melanoma that is in the past may be considered that, you know, they're really in danger of their lives and their lives are at risk, and it's obviously not great. And it's great to have an option in terms of this immunotherapy option that could enhance their likelihood of being cured or prolonging their life. So it's a fantastic breakthrough, and it's great that we recognize these medical breakthroughs. But however, what concerns me is the distorted message that the media then shares based on little snippets of speeches that are shared on Australia Day when the recipients receive their awards. And the media just takes these little one-liner titles and snippets to say that, you know, that Aussie tanning culture is terrible and we need to get out of the sun, and we should avoid this sun exposure. The sun is evil. And it's really distorting the importance of sunlight for our health. And what happens is that people take these headlines, don't really look into the context of why it was said and how it was said, and it's taken out of all context. And then the take-home message is keep out of the sun. It's bad for us. Well, it's in actual fact, it's the complete opposite. Well, not the complete opposite. You know, I certainly want to put context to it that anything in excess is dangerous and harmful, such as even water or even oxygen. So the basics that we need to survive, such as oxygen and water, those in excess are dangerous and harmful to us. But another basic necessity of life is sunlight. And again, excessive exposure of sunlight is harmful and dangerous. But we don't want to lose it in context and think that all sunlight is harmful and dangerous, and therefore we need to put copious amounts of sun cream on. We need to cover up our bodies. We need to wear sunglasses. In actual fact, that's taking an extreme view, which is causing us harm, and we're actually suffering from the lack of sunlight. So there's more disease today that's coming from the result of lack of sunshine, such as mental illness, depression, even anxiety, even dementia, even Parkinson's. All of these can be traced back to the lack of sunlight. Even melanoma, skin cancer, and all sorts of cancers, all forms of cancers can be tracked back to inadequate sunlight, vitamin D deficiency. And so we don't want to be distorting the message to say that all sun is bad. We just need to get the sun right. And this is referred to as getting your sun diet right, as opposed to a sun junk diet, or a light junk diet. So a light good diet, so we're talking the diet of light, which is a play on words. But a good diet of light is that we see morning sunrise. That's really important to set our body in a harmonious ability to communicate between systems, because we need the reset of time. We need this circadian reset, and we can do this through getting morning light. Getting morning light exposure gets us in the circadian rhythm, and we need that in order to have good communication across all our systems. So that is getting good light, morning sunlight. In actual fact, with the sun rising, there is no UV in it. And the actual fact around UV is that it's not all bad. We actually need UV light to do things in our body to keep us well and healthy. It is excessive UV light exposure that is toxic. And in particular, a lot of the non-native EMFs that are produced, such as through screens, are toxic to us because they're narrow band light. It is not broadband light. Broadband light is actually good for us, and that comes from the sunlight. Because it's a broad spectrum, it counterbalances itself. It helps us maintain balance within our systems. However, when we get narrow spectrum light, like just blue light coming, or just predominantly blue light from our screens, that is toxic to us because it's too much. It's too high intensity. It's the same as when we go to the tanning salons, which is often referred to when people say this bronze Aussie culture is toxic. Well, it's those that are going to the tanning salons that are just getting a narrow band of light emitted on their body, which obviously is too much for the body. It's too intense and it becomes toxic. But that's just like me drinking excessive amounts of water or having excessive oxygen exposure or not enough oxygen exposure. You get what I mean? It's too much or too little creates problems, creates disease. And in actual fact, what we're seeing is that we're getting too much disease, or disease as a derivative of the lack of sunlight. We need actually more sunlight. We've been driven away from it because of these headlines and misinformation, and because of distorted messages. And of course, the media is out to get you all fearful because that drives news. It drives people to talk because we are wired to exaggerate the negative. That's our survival mechanism kicking in. It's when our amygdala is running us. We distort the negative to prepare us for the worst case scenario. That is an inbuilt mechanism we have within us, and the media thrives on it. But what I'm doing is providing a counterbalance to this headline that says all light is toxic. It's not. We actually need broadband light to stay healthy. And let me share some reasons why. So in the morning, we set the circadian rhythm. By establishing that circadian rhythm, we then start producing serotonin. We start producing melatonin. So we actually produce some hormones that we need to keep us well, these neurotransmitters that we talk about a lot, and that we often take pills for because we are deficient in it. And it's most likely because we have a deficient light diet, or we have a junk light diet. And that is that we're getting lots of blue light exposure through our screens, but we're not getting enough natural sunlight exposure. So in the morning, we're going to get UVA light. So the morning, so around 7, depending on where you are in the world, obviously, summertime here in Australia. So we have the sun rising around 6 or 5, depending on if you're on daylight savings or not on daylight savings. But in that first part, the first couple of hours, there's very little UV light. So you don't need to worry about too much UV. But we actually need the next part, which is UVA, that comes around that, 7 a.m. onwards, or 7 to 11, we're getting predominantly UVA, because UVA is where we make pregnenolone, which is a bit of a tongue twister for me. But that is where we create a cascade of our sex hormones. So our testosterone, our estrogen, our progesterone come from pregnenolone, right? And this is where we make, this is in the mitochondria. It needs the UVA light in order to make the melatonin. The melatonin, 95% of what we make is made from the mitochondria, which is made in the day. The pineal gland only makes 5% of what we need around melatonin. And so we need to get sunlight, particularly morning sunlight, to make our sex hormones, to make dopamine. So dopamine is often what we're deficient in, and when we're deficient in it, we're seeking fulfillment through other external means, such as addictions, so that we go for food, sugar, in particular sugar. because we have low dopamine, and it's because we're not getting good light exposure. We're getting this toxic light exposure, which depletes us and actually creates missed messages and mixed signals within the body. Because if we only get narrow band light, such as blue light from our screens, it's telling the body that it's the middle of the day and it's middle of the summer. And so you could be in the middle of your winter, but if you're looking at your screen all day, you're telling your body to do things that it does in the middle of the day and the middle of summer, such as create cortisol, which is our awake hormone, keeps us awake, keeps us active. It helps us achieve things. So it creates high cortisol. It also generates insulin. So because insulin that we need to uptake glucose into the cell so that we can get energy into the cell, we can get nourishment into the cell. We need insulin. And so insulin's very active with blue light. But if we're seeing that all the time, then our body's constantly thinking it's the middle of the day and continue to do middle of the day things. And this is where we're constantly producing insulin, and we create insulin sensitivity as a result of excessive non-native EMF blue light exposure coming from our screens, our computers, our TV screens, coming from our phones. All this screen time is creating this miscommunication within the body, and the body's confused. So it's doing things that it just does when it's exposed to middle of the day and with blue light. And that is excreting insulin, which when we excrete too much, our cells become insensitive to it. So it doesn't answer the knock on the door from insulin to allow the glucose in. So therefore our cells aren't getting energy. We have this insulin resistance that's created because we're producing too much insulin, because we're too much in front of our screens and we're getting a junk light diet. What we need to do is stay in sync with the natural light to keep our body in sync. So we do need to get periodic exposure throughout the day to natural sunlight. So we want to be getting at least 5 minutes of natural light every hour. If we can't get it every hour, we want to be getting 10 minutes every 2 hours or 15 minutes every 4 hours to keep our body in sync with the circadian rhythm. And so what we'll get is we get the broad spectrum of light which the body needs. As I said, we create neurotransmitters from it, we create hormones from it, we help create energy, we help communication within our within our systems. And not only we create the communication and that being in symphony, in harmonious symphony, as opposed to being in miscommunication and not knowing what time of day it is because we have this artificial light exposure all the time. By staying in this nice sympathy, the other thing that we do by getting sun exposure regularly is we're charging our batteries. Yes, our water batteries, okay? We're made up of predominantly water. And through the excitation from photons from the sun, it charges our battery. It gives us energy. And it's why if we're inside all the time and not getting regular check-ins with the sun, we can get deflated from this exposure to all these non-native EMFs, which send miscommunication into our systems, and the body gets all confused. These messages, this miscommunication, it doesn't know what to do. It's not in sync or in harmony, and it gets deflated. We actually lose our battery charge. It gets stripped from us because of these excessive exposure to non-native EMFs. So we need to keep our battery charged by getting sunlight, by grounding our feet, and through doing this, we're getting this level of energy for our systems to run off. We charge up our battery through getting electrons through the grounding, and then we excite those electrons through the sun, and we've got this charged up battery. It's why we feel great when we go outside and spend time outdoors with our bare feet on the ground, because we're charging up our battery. Then you can go inside, do some work, and then on the next break, get outside and charge up the battery again. So you can constantly stay energized and not continually feel deflated. And what we typically do is we stay inside. When we feel deflated, we go and eat something. And so we end up eating excessive amounts of food because that's the only source where we're getting electrons from. And however, we can reduce the amount of food consumption by getting outside and charging in other ways. Because in actual fact, we're designed only to get 30% of our electrons through food, 30%. So 70% through other means such as water, grounding, and exciting these batteries, our batteries, through light exposure. We can get energy through other means other than food. So if you're wanting to avoid excessive eating and overeating, we need good light exposure, but not narrow band, toxic blue light exposure continuously throughout the day. We want to break it up, get outside, get natural light exposure, get the communication happening within our body, get some natural energy boost, charge our batteries so that we can go again and be more vitalized and be more resilient, be more adaptable for what we're facing throughout our day by getting outside. Now, the other thing I wanted to share in terms of natural sunlight, so it goes through phases. So we go through UVA in the early that morning part of the day, and then we go into UVB, and there's obviously crossover between UVA and UVB. So we get a bit of UVA and UVB, and one will be more predominant than the other. But they're both helpful for us, and they both prepare one another for what's coming. So UVA creates vasodilation. So what it does is it stimulates nitrogen oxide production within our body, which creates vasodilation. And that vasodilation actually reduces our blood pressure. It gets our blood out to our peripheries, right? So it gets it out to our skin. And it's what it's preparing the blood for, and the exposure to is UVB. So it's carrying the cholesterol out to the skin so it can then receive UVB light, which then cracks cholesterol and sulfates it, combines it with sulfur, and then we get sulfated cholesterol, and then it can go off and produce hormones and do its work throughout the body and send light signals throughout the body. And so we have this great harmonious working together, UVA to create the vasodilation, UVB creates vasoconstriction to counterbalance, and it does this beautiful dance, and it works together to create harmonious signals in our body and to actually create hormones that we need, signaling amongst our systems to get a coherent message throughout our body so that we're working in harmony as opposed to feeling that we're in disharmony and that we need pick-me-ups or calm-me-downs because we're all over the place and we've got all this chaos. And so whenever we get chaotic messages in our body, it forms inflammation. That's where inflammation comes from, is through chaotic messages. When our body is out of sync, creates inflammation. But we can get harmonious signals in our body through natural light exposure, broadband light, and getting little doses throughout the day. So just pulsing it. It's not missing morning light and then exposing the body to UVB, intense UVB light in the middle of the day. That's junk light diet. That is where we can get excessive exposure to UVB light, and anything in excess, as I said, is dangerous to us. And that's what they've associated with excessive UVB to melanoma. But it's just not doing the light right. That is, and just doing it in periods of, we just get toxic amounts of UV light, and we're not getting that infrared light at the start of the day, infrared light at the end of the day, which is preparing us. So when we get the infrared light, we initiate this production of melatonin, and the melatonin is like a coolant of our engine system. It's like an antioxidant, and it prepares us for oxidative stress during the middle of the day that we get from UVB light. So in actual fact, by getting regular sun exposure throughout the day, we are preparing our body for it. It's ready for it, as opposed to being smashed because it's got no infrared light at the start of the day. It's got no UVA light at the start of the day, and it's just exposed to middle of the day sun where you're sunbaking and getting too much of a narrow band of light and not getting the full broad spectrum of light that comes throughout the cycle of light throughout the day. So we want to be doing sunlight, but doing it well, getting regular exposure throughout the day and not just getting one part of the day and missing the rest of the day. We want to be dipping in constantly throughout the day, but not doing it for excessive periods of time. I don't spend all day in the middle of the day outside. I spend a good portion of my day at the start of the day outside. Then I come inside and I just get little exposure during the middle of the day. I don't get I'm doing 5-minute bouts. And because I've built up my solar callus through getting the morning sunlight and the evening sunlight, I've got more tolerance, more protection, because I've got more melanin on the outside, and the melanin protects us from the UV light. It reflects a lot of the UV light, but it certainly absorbs the full spectrum of light, but it gets rid of the excess. And so by having this solar callus of melanin on the outside, which is, that browner pigment of your skin, I'm protecting myself from excessive exposure to damaging UV light. However, I'm still getting a dose of it, but I'm not overdosing on it. And so it's about doing your light diet right and not doing anything to excess. So I'm not promoting you to go out and get middle of the day sun for hours without any sun protection. If you're going to be out in the sun in the middle of the day for hours, then you need to protect yourself. But what I do is just pulse it. I just go into shade and then out of shade, but I just do more time out of shade and more time in shade at the middle of the day. In the morning, when it's got a lot of the infrared light, a lot of the red light, a lot of the longer wavelengths that are really good in terms of regeneration to helping us rebuild and build up again, because the middle of the day is that destroying. So we go through the building phase at the morning, throughout the night, and in the evening. So evening, throughout the night, and the morning is that rebuilding. And then we got that destroying phase in the middle of the day, which is oxidative. And then we have that more reductive way of rejuvenating ourselves in the early morning, late evening, and throughout the night. But we need that balance of redox and oxidation, build and destroy, in order to keep us in harmony, because we do need to destroy cells. We need to destroy the cancer cells. But if we have this system that's not getting regular checks and balances and is only getting exposure to narrow bandwidth light, then that's going to be junk light and toxic for our body. And this is going to create cancer within ourselves, and we're not going to be able to regulate it because we're not getting exposure to the rejuvenating spectrum of light, which is the red and infrared and far infrared and near infrared. Those long wavelength spectrum light is really healing to the body, but we need that with a bit of UV, because the UV, as I said, is where we initiate the synthesis of cholesterol. We need the UVB. But we want it with the UVA, we want it together. And the only way of getting it together is by getting regular checks of the light throughout the day and regular exposure, but not excessive exposure. So start low, and particularly depending on what type of skin. Like if you've got really fair skin, then you need less time in the sun. The darker you are, the more time you need. So it really depends on your skin type, and you're the best judge of that. But just pulsating it, just so that you're getting 1 minute in the middle of the day if you've got really fair skin, but you're getting good exposure in terms of you haven't got sunglasses protecting your eyes, because otherwise we're blocking out full spectrum light from our eyes, and we have these visible photoreceptors and then these non-visible light photoreceptors, and we need to get that full spectrum into our eyes to send the message throughout the body so it can do its various functions that it does when it receives those light signals. So we don't want to have sunglasses on when we're getting our minute of exposure, and we don't want to be fully covered up. We want also our skins, because our skins have these photoreceptors as well, not for non-visible light and for visible light. So the visible light is the colors we see, but then there's the whole non-visible spectrum, such as the near infrared, the far infrared, and the infrared light. We don't see them, or we don't see the real narrow, bands of light that are high intensity, such as the ultraviolet. We don't see those. We don't see the ultraviolet spectrum. But that's high intensity and we need less of it, but we still need some exposure to it. And what I'm saying is doing it safe, but what we don't want to be doing is avoiding it totally, because that's when we're going to create problems. That's when we're going to have low vitamin D. Low vitamin D has been associated with skin cancer. Low vitamin D is associated with autoimmune disease, associated with mental health disorders. Low vitamin D is associated with a lot of immune disorders, immune dysregulation. And when we have immune dysregulation, we get inflammation that gets out of control. There's no checks and balances on the inflammation. We want to bring order to inflammation by sun exposure. It brings coherent signals and allows the body to then get back into sync for what it's supposed to do at that time of the day. When we're sending a lot of missed signals by getting exposure to blue light in the evening, when we've been built not to be exposed to blue light in the evening, only in the middle of the day, then that sends mixed signals to our body. And in the evening, it's telling the body to produce more cortisol. When you have elevated cortisol, you have low melatonin circulating, and that's going to create this wakefulness. And at night, you want to go to sleep, right? And this is what creates the insomnia. And then the other thing it creates is excessive amount of insulin production if you're getting blue light exposure in the evening. And then when you've got excessive amounts of insulin production, you're creating this mismatch. And this is why you feel hungry in the evening, because you've got low dopamine because you've been hit with all this blue light. You've got high insulin, which is telling you that you're hungry and you're crashing. And you've got high cortisol. And so you've got this total mixed match. And that's why we're eating too much in the evening, because we're exposed to too much blue light. So in the evening, you want to tone down the lighting. You want to get more candle lights around your house. And the candle lights lower than your eye line, so that it's sort of projecting a nice long wavelength that our eyes is then thinking, it's the end of the day and it's the sun's going down, and so we want little light exposure in the evening. And certainly we don't want the LED light exposure. We want to turn it down if we can. Turn down the LED exposure. Turn on the incandescent light lamps or whatever so that you can read. Turn down the white light and blue light on your screens, which you can put it onto night mode. I have all my devices on night mode, and I certainly don't work past sunset. Once my system switches on to sunset, then it's time for me to stop working on my computer. So I have all these little cues to tell me that, hey, it's sunset now. The body's not designed to see blue light after sunset. And so I've got these cues to tell me to turn off the computer. And if I need to work on the computer, I wear these blue light blockers, and I have the device emitting minimal amount of blue light, very little blue light. It's a yucky, yellow, orange light that lacks clarity, because it's the blue light that gives complete clarity. But that's what we're designed to see in the middle of the day, not at the end of the day or the start of the day. So it's really important in the end of the day that you minimize the exposure to narrow band light, and that you dim lights and use blue light blockers if you need to work in later than sunset, and then to make sure your screen's not emitting the full spectrum blue light. It's got less emissions. And so you can do these little things. You can light little candles throughout. If you don't like candles, then buy some incandescent light globes for the evening, or have some incandescent lamps that emit a broader spectrum of light, and it's not so narrow. It's actually got some red light and orange light. It's not all blue light. So it's important that we do these sort of things in order to keep our body in harmony, to keep the communication in sync, so that we can heal and repair when we're supposed to. And when we oxidize and break down and destroy, around the middle of the day, then in that repair work, at nighttime, when the melatonin's really active, when we have autophagy and all these great actions to take out mutated cells, to get these mutated cells that are going to become cancerous if they're not taken out. And so we have these checks and balances in place, provided our body is doing the right things at the right time of day, and it's not getting too much of one signal light at time of the day when it's not meant to receive that signal of light, such as blue light at night. So what I want you to do, get regular sun exposure during the day, 5 minutes every hour. And if you've got really fair skin, just start with little, it could be 1 minute, 30 seconds, just getting that, but just getting it throughout the day and making sure that when you do get it, that you're doing it without sunglasses, without sun cream, and minimal clothes, so that all your photoreceptors on your skin and in your eyes are getting full spectrum light, good light, but not doing it excessively. I'm not promoting anything excessive. I'm just promoting what your body needs and what it needs to stay in sync and to do all the functions it needs to do throughout the day, so that it can do its night functions, because we produce most of our melatonin during the day. So we need to make sure we're doing the light diet right, and not a junk light diet, such as just blue light exposure throughout the day and night, and to keep our body working in harmony so we can have good blood glucose regulation. We create the dysregulation through excessive narrow band light exposure and non-native EMF exposure. That creates sugar dysregulation. If you want sugar regulation, then what we want to be doing is getting the regular sun exposure with grounding, coupled with drinking filtered water. That is really going to help with blood glucose regulation, and eating whole foods that are in season and that are locally produced, because it's from our foods that also we get a signal from the food we get as to what season it is, because we shouldn't be eating foods that are out of season, because that's a mismatch to what our eyes are seeing. And then we create these incoherent signals within the body, because the body's getting some food that's got a barcode of light that was created, the food was created in the equator, and it's saying, no, you're not at the equator, you're getting the light through your eyes to show that you're in winter, but you're eating food from the equator. And so you create this mismatch, these incoherent signals create inflammation. It creates disturbance in the body, and the body becomes out of sync, and that's how we manifest disease. We need to stay in sync by eating foods that are local, in season, and that we're getting regular sun exposure throughout the day. And we're also getting the heat exposure or the cold exposure if it's in winter. So we want the heat stress proteins, because that's another way how we get coherent signals in the body, is these heat stress proteins that are stressed either through heat or cold, depending on the season, but it's sending the body at the time of day, the season it's in, and then the body knows what to do for that time of the day and the season it's in. And so we do want to not have excessive amounts of cover up and protection from the cold, and then we don't want to be running air conditionings all the time. We want our body to experience the heat of the day to stay in sync, because that's another way it gets the signal as to what time of the day it is and what season it is, through the temperature. So it's another way we get it, through light and temperature. So, light and heat, or light and cold, depending on whether you're on winter or summer. So I hope that was really helpful in terms of bringing a full balanced message to you, not through a headline, by spending a good period of time, a good half an hour with you, as to how to do it well, and not just take headlines and then run with the headlines thinking that all sunlight's bad. All sunlight's not bad. In actual fact, no life exists without sunlight. What we want to do is make sure we get broad spectrum light, not narrow band, non-native EMF, such as through our screens, and just getting that exposure, because that's sending missed signals, and those missed signals create inflammation, and that's where disease manifests from. If we get coherent signals from the sun, we get a complete match with the foods we're eating and the temperature we're exposed to, then our body can stay in a nice harmony and do the right things at the right part of the day. And that's where you're going to get your cancer protection from, is when your body's in harmony. It's the missed signals, the junk light diet, and eating foods out of season and eating processed foods is where we create and we allow disease to manifest. So in order to stay on top of it and to prevent cancer, what you want to do is do a healthy light diet and not a junk light diet. If you want more support and more information around this, please reach out to me. Reach out to me, Anthony, at me&my.wellness.com.au, and I'll answer any further questions you have. And I'm happy to support you through one-on-one consulting, or you can join my one-on-one group session group on Patreon, where we do group consults together and I share information with the group, and you also get discounted to my other products and services. So you can join the Patreon group through the show notes. There's a link at the bottom, support the show, and that takes you to my Patreon group. Or you can reach out to me directly if you've got any further questions on how you can do this tailored to your skin type, tailored to your unique circumstances. I'm happy to help you. I hope this was insightful, and for those that you know, loved ones out there that you'd like them to live a more healthier and more informed, healthy life, please share this episode with them. Thank you for tuning in to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand Me and My Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me and My Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, Me and My Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast, and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages, or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of Me and My Health Up.